Hello there, it's Andy Parks from the Washington Times, and I'll be joined by Stephen Dinan, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, right after this. As a listener to my podcast, you qualify to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times, and all you have to do is go to washingtontimes.com/Andy. That's washingtontimes.com/ANDY. All right, as promised, Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, Stephen Dinan. Hello, Stephen.
Hello, Andy.
Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas to you, too. Very exciting time of year, huh?
Yep. See, where some special agents at ICE are going to get a Christmas present in the form of body cameras. What's this all about?
So this is mandated by Congress, and this administration obviously has eagerly embraced it to start deploying body cameras on federal law enforcement officers and agents. As this administration calls it, it's a move towards accountability. Now, ICE is a bit of a tricky situation. There's a lot of surveillance work and that sort of stuff that goes on with it. Officers and agents aren't necessarily going to be eager to have cameras visible on their outfits and whatnot. So it's a little bit tricky to sort of work out exactly how it happens for some of those folks. One of the effects of all that is that this is a pilot program that's starting with ICE's, essentially their equivalent, their SWAT team in 3 different locations. So those are folks who are, when they're gearing up, they're clearly going in, not undercover and not for sort of doing secret surveillance. They are a brutal force of law, and so maybe that's a good test for the cameras. It'd be interesting to see how ICE expands this to deportation officers who, I've gone on some ride-alongs, and it's hours of sitting in vans and it's sort of outside of people's locations, just trying to get a feel for their patterns, so when you can best arrest them without too much of a disruption. All the different restrictions that are placed on ICE, and this administration in particular is placed on ICE, and mixing that together with body cameras is going to be a real challenge.
Mm-hmm. In my mind, it's more about the agent's behavior, not about catching bad guys.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's very much about the agent's behavior and the agent's encounters with the public. Exactly. Obviously, a number of police departments have moved forward. Local and state police departments have moved forward with body cameras. It turns out there are some studies that suggest that it actually ends up helping officers because it cuts down on fraudulent or bogus, behavioral complaints that from citizens who are like, I was abused by this guy, or he said nasty stuff, inappropriate stuff to me. And it turns out that a number of those have been disproved through the body camera. So there's some law enforcement advocates who say this is actually going to help officers, ICE officers and Border Patrol agents who are already under a pilot program that began over the summer to deploy thousands of cameras to Border Patrol agents. They face a whole lot of complaints about their interaction with the illegal immigrant population that they're dealing with. And there's some sense that this might actually help tamp down on some of the more frivolous of those complaints and allow all sides to focus on the actual real cases. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Border Patrol, as I said, has been doing this for a few months already, deploying for a few months already, and we don't really have a good sense yet for how it's going with them, and that'll be an early test. And as I said, ICE, the SWAT teams are probably not the best test of what body cams will mean for ICE officers. That'll come when it starts getting out to the deportation force.
Gotcha. All right, that leads me to your next story, potential terrorist nab crossing the border in Arizona. I'm sorry, while this being disturbing, it shouldn't shock anyone, right?
It's a good question, Andy. There's been a debate for actually for 20 years now, dating back to 9/11, about whether the borders are a vulnerability for the U.S. to terrorism. We know that the 9/11 hijackers all came through our immigration and visitor system. Obviously, none of them were homegrown. They all came from outside the country, from overseas, and were admitted. Many of them on student visas and that sort of stuff. You may remember, to learn how to fly planes at U.S. flight schools, and showed a lot of interest sort of the flight, but didn't really care about the landing. Very, very sort of awful reminder of the vulnerability that we literally let people in to train for their terrorist mission through our immigration system. So for the last 20 years, there's been a focus on where in the U.S. immigration system that vulnerability may be. The sense for a long time was the risks were coming legally or through, through airports and maybe seaports, but basically through airports. But in recent years, there's been, in the Trump administration and then now, there's been a real question about whether they aren't also coming across the border, the U.S.-Mexico border. And earlier this year, some Republican members of Congress were down on the border and said they had been told by agents on the border that there were terrorist dangers coming across. They were mocked. People in the media said, that doesn't happen. Homeland Security downplayed the numbers, and yet, very soon after that, we got word out of Yuma, Arizona, that there were two Yemeni men, both of whom showed up on terrorist watch lists, FBI terrorist and no-fly lists. And interesting that press release was put out and then quickly deleted by the Border Patrol. And a spokesman said that it contained information that did not meet their public dissemination requirements. We still don't know what that means, but nobody's denied that those two Yemeni men on the terrorist watch list were actually apprehended. And then now, as you said, a Saudi national who the chief border patrol agent in Yuma, the same exact area in western Arizona, declared as a potential terrorist, was nabbed late last week. We don't know anything more about this potential terrorist other than that he was caught wearing a hoodie or a jacket of a volunteer fire department in a town in New York. And that's got New York congressman was like, well, we need to get to the bottom of this, figure out why a guy that the Border Patrol labels a potential terrorist is coming through with this jacket on. So, like all of these cases, a lot of questions and not many answers right now, but it absolutely does tell you that amid all of the other illegal traffic and illegal flows coming across the southern border right now, that there are folks that American law enforcement are worried are terrorists.
All right, DHS to plug gaps Biden left in Trump's border wall. Nothing like fixing the barn door after the horse has already run away, right?
Well, so this is interesting, right? Those gaps are still there, so maybe the way to look at it is better late than never. We don't know how much mileage this actually is. What we do know, and what I've reported several times over the course of this year, are that there are gaps that were left in the wall, like literally sections with it that were nearing completion that were stopped. President Biden issued his inauguration day halt to wall construction. These gaps were left. In some instances, the Border Patrol had already built the access roads down to the wall area there and the high-speed road that runs alongside it so that the agents can get back and forth quickly and get to where incursions happen and come and pick up the groups of illegal immigrants. So they had the roads there, but there were these gaps there. And the sheriff in Cochise County in Arizona said, we just built the immigrants a superhighway. They're coming through the gaps, and the drivers are sitting there waiting, and they use those roads that we built to quickly get onto the interstates and disappear into the country. We need to plug those gaps. And there are all sorts of other examples. There were gates that were supposed to be installed and made working that because of the work halt, they were never actually made working. So the gates were just left open. And so the administration now says that it will plug gaps and fix those gates and do some other work on the border wall. It doesn't mean that they're building, dozens of miles or the 200 more miles that the Trump administration would have built had it been still in office. But it is quite a concession that it essentially says that it's an acknowledgement that the Biden halt that was issued on January 20th of this year has left the country more vulnerable. And that's a major admission for this administration, which has resisted that from the start.
All right, I'm going to turn your attention to Secret Service says pandemic fraud totals nearly $100 billion. If anyone ran a business the way the government runs, they'd be bankrupt in a week. I mean, come on, how does this happen?
Andy, what you just said, the guy that I've been talking to and talked to for this story, his name is Haywood Talcove. He's the CEO of LexisNexis Risk Solutions Government Division. So basically an expert on the security for governments that do these benefit programs and whatnot. And he made that exact point. Well, let's back up a minute. The same fraudsters that are going after that government cash have gone after in the past. They went after all those companies. They're the ones who are running the romance fraud schemes, phishing schemes, all all the crazy internet mails you're getting, those are these same guys who are doing that sort of stuff. And they're doing the identity fraud. They're stealing people's identities and trying to get at the IRS. It turns out that the companies have gotten really good about, I mean, not great, not perfect, but much better at sniffing out this sort of fraud, which is why when you go, log into any company that deals with your financial data now, you have to enter your password, go to text message, enter that code. There are also, there are identity questions that follow. Basically, a screen there to try and make sure that you are who you say you are. Guess who's really far behind on that? The governments, in this particular instance, mainly state governments who administer the unemployment system. That $100 billion that the Secret Service says has gone to fraud, that turns out to be a really low ball estimate. The guy I was talking with, Haywood Talcove at LexisNexis, he thinks it's at least double that just in the unemployment benefits, not to mention the Small Business Administration program. So anyway, it's just massive, massive, massive fraud. And the point you made is exactly right. No business could operate, and most businesses have figured out how to get to stop this sort of vulnerability. Leave it to the government to be years behind.
Wow. All right, before I let you run, what are you working on?
Well, it's actually a story that I just completed that you reminded me of it with the pandemic fraud. Senator Joni Ernst out of Iowa does something called the Squeal Award every month, where it's based on her 2014 campaign, where she promised to come to what she told she was a farm girl in Iowa, where she used to castrate pigs. And her big catch line was she was going to come to Washington and make the big spenders squeal the same way she made those pigs squeal. Squeal Award went to a town in Utah that used its coronavirus relief money to buy a bunch of snow guns to make snow for a sledding and tubing hill, and the town in New Jersey who bought a bunch of tote bags. They bought those bags using coronavirus money to try and bolster their local economy, to encourage folks to shop local for Christmas, but they never actually gave out the tote bags at a time when Americans are facing inflation and struggling to buy Christmas presents. Not just the private fraudsters, the government itself seems pretty good about blowing your taxpayer money on coronavirus stuff as well.
Oh, man. All right, we got to check that out at WashingtonTimes.com. That's where all of Stephen Dinan's stories reside. Great to talk to you as always. Continue to have a great holiday season, and we'll do it again.
Good to talk to you, Andy.
Washington Times Assistant Managing Editor, Stephen Dinan. Thanks for joining me today, and remember to receive a 50% discount on an annual digital subscription to the Washington Times. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/Andy. You'll get 24/7 digital access to the Washington Times at 50% off. That's right. Go to WashingtonTimes.com/ANDY. I'm Andy Parks. Have a great day.